On today's show, Ime Udoka says no changes to the Houston Rockets starting lineup. Is that a good move or a bad move? Plus an update on Tari Eason, who is still out with the lower leg injury, and concerns about the Rockets' offensive efficiency. We're going to unpack it all right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
Throw it up to Jalen Green.
Sengun here in the short row. Oh my, that's the no look.
Jabari for three and the win. Yeah!
Look at Tari Eason.
Here comes Tari.
No! T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
The Houston Rockets select Thompson and Cam Whitmore.
One thing I have never done is not made the playoffs, and so we want to take that step here as well.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin. The show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for being an everydayer and making the show part of your day every single day. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, and none other than the X's and O's man himself, Alykhan Bijani, who you can track down on Twitter at Rockets_Insider. Here to unpack a lot as we are now past the NBA All-Star break. The Rockets back in the swing of things, back practicing at Toyota Center Wednesday afternoon, and some updates from head coach Ime Udoka about the team moving forward. An update on forward Tari Eason, and then also the bigger update of the two, I think. Ime announced no plans to change the starting lineup for the Rockets after hinting pretty strongly at looking at making some changes to the starting lineup after the Memphis Grizzlies loss headed into the All-Star break for the Rockets. Alykhan, I believe you have the exact quote from Ime from Wednesday's practice. Go ahead and hit us with that.
Yeah, so Ime said, quote, "Took a look at some things over the last 27 games, and I wanted to get a look when we are more whole." He later went on to say, "You're looking at Dillon missing 9 games, Fred missing the last 5, Jabari missing 4, and the ups and downs we had to start those games with different lineups. I felt we played a lot better, obviously, in the first 27 than the last 27. So I want to get back to that consistency, and we'll take a look at our group going forward as is and see if we can get back to the consistency and competitiveness that we had in the first 27, unquote. Very fascinating. I'm genuinely shocked. I did think a move was coming, but I also understand Ime's rationale for wanting to not make a decision without being 100% confident and sure that it's the right decision. I think it would have helped if Tari Eason was healthy, and Tari Eason is still out. He's going to be out for the New Orleans game. He's been missing games due to a left lower leg injury management. That is a designation, official designation on the Rockets injury report. I can't tell you what the exact injury is other than it says left lower leg injury management. But all to say, Jackson, I think if Tari was healthy, and just based on the play of Amen recently during the stretch where Fred was out, I think we may have seen it change. But I think it changes. It all changes, right? You may have gone over All-Star break, looked at the game, and said, I think I know what I want to do in those first quarters, because Ime later highlighted that the first quarters are where they have most of their issues.
You know, the way I look at this, I'll admit, I was initially taken aback because I really thought the way that Ime, having watched, seen the press conference footage and just kind of the way that Ime was very frustrated after that Grizzlies loss, I really thought change was coming in some capacity, right? And we went over it on this very show, discussing which positions could potentially be headed for a change. And it wasn't just, Jalen Green as the starting 2 guard, right? There was an argument maybe for Jabari, maybe even Sengun because of the slow starts, the lack of energy at the beginning of games. I do understand where Ime is coming from here in not making a shakeup here because the starting lineup hasn't been healthy and they haven't had the consistency that they had across the first 27 games, as he pointed out, versus these last 27 games. So I'd imagine that, the game plan here from Ime's perspective is come back in with your healthy starting lineup, right? The starting lineup that earlier in the season was productive and was putting up good numbers. One of the best starting lineups in the NBA over that span of 27, 30 or so games to start the year. See if you can get back to that level of play with the starting lineup. And if you can, great. Stick with it, ride it out to the end of the season. Maybe hopefully Tari Eason comes back in somewhere in that stretch. More on that in a second. However, I feel like what this does, though, is it gives Ime a chance to say, hey, this is like everyone's final chance, right? Not just to say Jalen, but this is Jalen, Jabari, Dillon, Alpi, like that entire 5-man unit has to get back to business. And if they play the first 4 or 5 games and they're still kind of like a train wreck coming out in the first quarter, the energy's not there, something is just off with that lineup and they can't get back to the success that they had earlier this season, then I think we could possibly see a change maybe 5 games in. And that's different from what I thought before this, because I really did think if we didn't see a change from the jump right out of the gate, that we wouldn't see a change at all. But I think now the way that Ime kind of explained his reasoning is he wants to get back to that lineup, see if the health can be a factor here. Now they've had some rest in the All-Star break. They're able to kind of stress some things, go over some concepts before flying back out to deal with the Pelicans Thursday night. So we'll see, man.
I just a shout out also to Adam Spillane of Sports Radio 610. He put out a story, and I'm reading the quotes off of his story. I did not attend the practice, but I just wanted to make sure I give Adam credit for putting together the story. One other quote that he kind of transcribed from Ime. Ime said, quote, "I looked at our last 27 games. I think we're 1-13 when we lose the first quarter and 8-4 when we win the first quarter," unquote. And when I read that, it was fascinating. And I actually did some more research, Jackson, that I want to share. So I went back and looked at the 27 game stretch, right? Like this 27 game stretch he's talking about. This is December 26th. So basically post-Christmas all the way up until the All-Star break. That is that 27 game stretch, okay? And overall in that 27 game stretch, in the first quarter, I want to read to you some stats for the starters based off of wins and losses. So in games they've won, okay, Alperen Sengun has come out firing. He's averaging almost five field goal attempts in every first quarter. 2.2 assists, 3 rebounds. I mean, he is playing well. He has a positive plus minus. So that's good. And also everybody else in the starting lineup, Jalen Green is a positive plus minus, Dillon Brooks, Fred VanVleet, Jabari Smith Jr., and they're all shooting very well. Jabari especially comes off shooting well, as well as Dillon Brooks. In their loss, Jalen Green is the lead free field goal attempt getter in the first quarter, averaging almost 5. Sengun is down to 4. Then you have Dillon Brooks at around 4. Fred VanVleet, he hasn't played all those 18 losses, but he's around 3. And then Jabari with the least amount. And all of their shooting percentage essentially dips, especially Alp and Jalen Green. And so I just find that fascinating, is that the field goal percentage, it's a make or miss league, stuff like that. But when you look at the numbers too, even Alp's assist numbers go down. And I do think there is something in regards to this lack of consistency that Ime's talked about with the lineup changes, but also something that's been on my mind, Jackson, especially over the last few months with all these injuries and the lineup changes. Have the Rockets truly established a hierarchy? We talked about that coming into the season of needing to have a hierarchy. And in the first quarter, you want to go to what is your base thing, what always works. First quarter and fourth quarter, right? You're starting and you're ending with your best players and your best plays, ideally, right? And so if your best play is Sengun running the offense and doing things, then we need to see more of that. If your best play is pick and roll, you have to see that, but it has to be done efficiently and with a good points per possession. And so I know we'll talk about that more, kind of what the Rockets can do to fix their offensive woes, but I just found that very interesting looking at the stats of these 27 games that Ime Udoka talked about, some of these trends that I noticed.
And we're going to dig into that a little bit more later on in this episode, because there was some stats circulating about every team's like best offensive action that they run. And so I want to spend a little bit of time focused on that later on. But I want to still discuss the starting lineup, the no changes coming from Ime, how we feel about that and what it says about this team moving forward into this final leg of the season post All-Star break, as well as some thoughts on Tari Eason and his injury situation. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Alykhan, I already told you that I was a little shocked. I think we both were that the Rockets ultimately didn't make a change to the starting unit. Already there in segment one, we both kind of shared some thoughts about why we think Ime kind of came to this conclusion, came to this decision, ultimately deciding not to make a change to the lineup. But I think there are a couple other factors here that bear repeating, because they're factors, they're variables that we've discussed before on this podcast. But I think they're factors that are important to consider that went into Ime's decision-making process, because here's the rub is Jalen Green has not been a very productive member of the starting lineup, unfortunately. He's got the worst net rating of all the starters. The team is a lot better when he's not on the basketball floor. The numbers support that, and they have pretty much all season long. So there's a lot of Rockets fans that I think are understandably confused as to why Ime wouldn't make a change that it very clearly would probably benefit the starting lineup, either swapping Jalen for Amin, or if Tari was healthy, doing that as an option, which we already talked about. It's not. Maybe Cam, even Aaron Holiday, possibly, right? So past all that, though, I do think there's a level of, and I've used this expression before, but once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't put it back. And the organization, it very much feels like to me all season long, the organization has done time and time again and has, tried to approach different ways to get the best version of Jalen Green, to really unlock him, to put him in positions to be successful. And we've seen Ime Udoka and the coaching staff kind of alter how they've deployed Jalen Green, on a game-by-game basis, whether it's more off-ball reps to start, then more on-ball reps later on, whether it's more minutes with the starters, whether it's staggering him and having him play more minutes with the bench unit. We've seen him be applied in a variety of different ways. And I think it's just, we're at a point where if Ime really wanted to gun for the play-in, and if that was their number one goal for this final stretch of the season, then I think a change probably would have been made. So I think what this tells us is that they're more worried about getting proper data and really seeing if they have something there with that starting unit, akin to what the success that they had in the first 27 games. And then again, they're prioritizing trying to figure out some kind of a solution, some kind of a sustainable, successful model with Jalen Green as a starter, rather than just throwing their hands up saying, you know what, we've tried a bunch of things. We're ready to give up. We're ready to, try something else and move him to the bench. But I also do think there's an element here of not of a kind of like asset depreciation, right? Where if you do move Jalen Green to the bench, then if you did want to try to trade him this offseason, then I think it lessens his value if you move him to the bench, because then you're signaling to the other teams in the association, hey, we moved him to the bench. He's not a long-term starter for us. And if you do leave him in the starting lineup, he has been known to be a second half player. His post All-Star break numbers have been pretty incredible each of his first 2 years in the NBA. So allowing him the opportunity to see if he can kind of catch fire here, over these last 25, 30 games or so, whatever it is, then that will up his potential trade value, or just, kind of rehabilitate his image a little bit as a potential trade piece this offseason, if that's the direction the team is intent on going with him.
Yeah, the thing about Jalen that fascinates me the most is that I feel like the Rockets can do a better job of getting him going. And I think there's different ways of doing that. And look, I'll be honest with you, Jackson. I've talked, I feel like I've mentioned this a lot. So if you've listened to episodes that Jackson and myself have done over the last year, I've been very, very consistent with my criticism for Jalen Green's passing. I think Jalen Green's passing would unlock a lot more of his offense, would make things easier for him and do a lot of things. But unfortunately, Jackson, I still haven't seen consistency from his passing ability to get me to, push for him to have the ball in his hands more, or do a lot of different things. But there are things that he does well enough now where I'm like, hey, let's prioritize those skills to help him get going, which ultimately gets everybody else going. And I think there are things that we can think about when it comes to the Rockets that make sense. Jalen Green's best play, if you look at the stats in terms of points per possession, is coming off of handoffs and cutting. And what's interesting about both of those? He starts both of those types of possessions on the move, because we know he's quick. So instead of having the ball in his hands and having to get passed by somebody and having to go to a change of pace, he doesn't have to have a change of pace, which he's still developing. He can stay, going one speed. And then the Rockets can take advantage of that one speed. Either he drives inside, which the teams are attacking on drives, but because he's going so fast and he can jump up so high, that opens up some of those passing lanes for Sengun that he can make those assists, or he can go up and finish. I do think it'll help Jalen if he takes more of those mid-range shots, just to keep the defense on point. But that's one thing. The second thing is the cutting, and that's where you have to lean in on LP. LP, I would say the last 10 games before the All-Star break, he had, I think, one, pass per game, and it was to Jalen cutting. And I like to see more of that, especially out of what we've seen in their first 3 years together being their best play, is empty corner actions between those two. Doesn't have to be a screen involved. Just put them on one side of the court, no corner shooter, and let them run an offense and have Jalen kind of move around and do things. Jalen can do that. He is able to navigate and create separation because of his speed. So I'd like to see the Rockets do a little bit more of that, and less maybe pick and roll. He spends most of his time, almost 40% of his offensive possessions, running pick and roll. And he's decent at it, but he's much better off of handoffs and cutting. So let's get him on the move where we know he can be successful.
Yeah, I was very curious because I wanted to look up the numbers, the points per possession numbers when, Fred and Jalen are handling the rock. Jalen so far this season, this is at least per NBA.com. When Jalen is the pick and roll ball handler, he's scoring 0.88 points per possession as the pick and roll ball handler. Fred VanVleet, not much better at 0.94 points per possession as the pick and roll ball handler. And then you compare that with Alperen Sengun, who is scoring 1.15 points per possession as the roll man, and as obviously the Rockets' primary roll man, since Jeff Green doesn't exactly run a lot too much pick and roll at this stage in his career. But I think this kind of segues us into a conversation about the Rockets' offensive. You mentioned like the hierarchy earlier on, but just kind of the overall offensive approach for this team. And I want to get to that in a second, because there was another kind of dual statistic that Sengun and Fred VanVleet share that I want your thoughts on, Alykhan. But before we jump completely into that, I did mention the Tari Eason situation. At this point, I'm almost to a point where this situation with his injuries feels like it's been so kind of like utterly mismanaged, where it's too late for whatever originally happened. If there was a mistake made, or if whatever. I'm not trying to get like tinfoil hat conspiracy theory with this situation, but all I'm gonna say is, at this point, would it just be better to just hold Tari out the rest of the season? I know that a lot of Rockets fans really want to see him. I myself would love to see him back in a Rockets jersey. He's such an impactful player when he's playing. But I think the worst thing you would want is to bring him back for something like the last 20 games of the season or whatever, and somehow re-aggravate that injury that's already sidelined him for more than half of this season as is. And then it forces his recovery timeline even further back to where maybe it's impacting his ability to train and develop in the off season and all this stuff. I'm almost at a point where I'd rather them just play it safe. You're going to have tons of minutes for Amin and Cam to still get them reps and developmental runtime and all that stuff. I know that Rockets fans would like to see Tari back, but I'm just almost at a point where stop playing him. Just play it safe. Let him rest. Let him get to be 100% for next season.
Yeah, I made the comment in the first segment about the whole like injury management, lower leg. Until I know what type of injury it is, I don't want to comment on it because I just generally don't know what happened or what's going on. I will say, Jackson, to me, Tari continues to grow and he gets better game after game, practice after practice. He just gets better over time. And if it's better for him to rest and to give him a full off season to train and get healthy and get better and kind of have the Rockets training staff mold him into a physique or a type of player in terms of role that they want him to be, I'm all for that. That to me is more of a priority than, like you said, playing. I think the data shows, and Ime and Rafael Stone have talked about it both publicly, how their data shows favorably how good Tari is on multiple different metrics in terms of impacting winning. I think you have that. I think right now is more about let's get Tari healthy and let's continue to have him develop and grow his skills.
Because we know what he can do when he is healthy, right? It's not like you have these big question marks about who is Tari Eason, what can he be? Like, yes, there's maybe some some untapped potential there, and maybe at times we've kind of boxed him into this identity or role for him with this team. Yeah. But sure, he can attain that ceiling later on. You don't have to get data points on Tari to figure out who he is or can he be a winning player. You already know he's a winning player. You know he impacts winning at an incredibly high level. So I don't think they have to do some of the research and evaluation process that they still have to do with guys like Amin and Cam, to a lesser degree, even Jabari Smith Jr. a little bit still this year, trying to explore what he can be or what he can do offensively, that kind of stuff.
I hope for the best for him. I love watching him play. I think he would have had a lot more playing time the second half of the season if he was healthy. But back to Jalen and in our discussion on there, Jackson, you brought up Fred VanVleet and Jalen. Just curious your thoughts more on those stats that you shared, and what was your biggest takeaway kind of whenever you first read those?
So we'll get to those in 1 second. We'll pile all the offensive efficiency stuff into the final segment here. That was kind of the flow of the show. It felt a little choppy there trying to set it up, but we found our way there. So coming up, we're going to get into some of the possible concerns, not even possible concerns. There are legitimate concerns about the Houston Rockets offensive efficiency this season and what we'd like to see different from them moving forward as far as their offensive schemes, production, all that stuff. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins, and all you have to do is wager $5. It's that simple. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. Right now you can take a look at the outright odds favorites to win the NBA title this season. The Boston Celtics leading the way at +230. The Nuggets behind them at +440. The Clippers not far behind them, +500. And then rounding out the top five, you have the Milwaukee Bucks at +650 and the Phoenix Suns, a distant fifth place, at +1400. So for all those odds and so much more, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Alykhan, back to your question about just the offensive numbers from Fred, Jalen, Alp. For one, I was actually a little surprised that Alp's numbers, just starting with Alp first, I was a little surprised that his numbers weren't better than they looked. In fact, because I looked at a few different statistics here, a couple of the ones that I didn't wind up mentioning were, post-up opportunities or isolation reps for guys like Jalen and Alp. I believe Alp has he's scoring 0.87 points per possession in isolation, and Jalen is not much better at 0.89 or something. Just kind of, I was just digging through miscellaneous offensive play types and statistics just to get a feel to try and see do the Rockets have a clear-cut best option? And their clear-cut best option is still Alperen Sengun. Basically, an Alperen Sengun post-up is their best, most effective play. 1.15 points per possession of all the available play type data that I was able to dig up and find. Really efficient play. That's why they've gone to it, right? That's why Ime's gone to it late in games. Alp's been their kind of go-to piece. Still a little shocking that it's not more efficient than it is, at 1.15. Respectable number. But then, I don't know, it kind of got me thinking about, if you look at where Alp's at, where his production is at, and then you look at his pick and roll partners in Jalen and Fred, and they've had some inconsistencies this season, it makes me think just how much more effective that dynamic could be, either between Alp and Jalen or Alp and Fred, if those two guys were just a little bit more effective, whether it's as shooters from the perimeter, scoring on the interior, just more scoring gravity in general, to apply more pressure to the defense. Because I think as the season's progressed, what we've seen is this trend where teams are consistently and routinely keying in on Alp, whether it's stopping him in the pick and roll, whether it's sending doubles and triple teams at him when he's posting up or facing up from the perimeter. Defenses are now fully geared to stop Alp. And so his production has slowed down a little bit because of that, because the Rockets as a team have been so bad and inconsistent to, support him as the best player, be it knocking down outside shots, keeping a defense honest, proper spacing, all these different variables.
And so there's a couple things I want to point out, because you bring up some excellent points and things that we need to consider going into the second half of the season. Let's start with that last point first. The part about Alp having a lot more attention drawn on him whenever they're running pick and roll. You saw an adjustment from Ime a little bit to solve that. And that's, instead of Alp rolling with the ball handler, right, when he sets the screen, you'll have him he'll kind of be parallel to the ball handler, and Fred will throw a little kind of bounce pass right into the pocket, and Alp will catch it and kind of make a decision. What I've seen a little bit, which is super small, but pay attention to it, is that Alp will be parallel, but on that pass, instead of having Fred send the bounce pass, which guides Sengun, right, he steps into catching the ball. Sengun is now, with other players, he takes a little bit of a step back. And why is that? Because it gives him a step or two of space before that secondary defender comes on to help on the nail or to help from the corner, gives him more space to be able to kind of survey and figure out what's going on. So I think it's subtle that Ime has kind of implemented, and I'm curious to see what more he can do with that in terms of variations offensively with their scheme. Second thing I want to bring up is the shooting. Absolutely, if the Rockets, especially Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet, shot better percentage-wise on their pull-ups or just coming off of screens at the top of the key, the Rockets' offense would be a lot better. And they've struggled, right? We've talked about it. They've struggled in the first quarter in terms of shooting, especially in losses. That's both Fred and Jalen. And I just think overall, if you can get both of those guys to shoot a better percentage of three, and I'm going to point him out here, Jalen Green especially from three, that's just going to open a lot more up. Lastly, one thing to pay attention to when it comes to this conversation about pick and roll versus dribble handoff, and you're seeing Jalen run a lot of pick and rolls, as we talked about, almost 40% of his offensive possessions. Fred VanVleet almost exclusively, with Alperen Sengun also running pick and roll. I find it interesting that since they're running that so much, Alp, I feel like now as a screen navigator, is much better when he sets those stationary picks and is kind of going north to south, versus in a dribble handoff, he has the ball, he's pitching it to Jalen, then he has to turn and do all those different things. He's still good at that, but he spends more of his time doing the stationary stuff, right? And so with Fred, it's more of a stationary action, right? You have Alp setting the screen and going from there. Jalen, same thing, set, going from there. I wonder if there is something to that with Jalen having being better in terms of on the move types of possessions or on the move types of actions versus with the pick and roll. It's a lot more stationary, right? You're surveying, you're navigating, you're having to play with a change of pace versus Jalen, much better suited right now, attacking on the move and doing those things. I wonder if that has played a role in terms of these numbers. And I'm curious to see that Ime going back and watching the film and digesting the information. What changes does he make? Does he try to go more with the Jalen dribble handoffs? Does he put Jalen in situations where he is moving a lot more on the perimeter, whether that's kind of resetting as a shooter, doing all those different things? Does he make Fred move a little bit more? So it's not just having Alp stationary, but setting those dribble handoff screens and doing those things more. So those are the three different things based off what you said I'm paying attention to, because you're absolutely right. The key to this offense is always going to be Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet and how well they can play with their special big in Alperen Sengun.
You know, and I'm very curious because I do think that Ime and the coaching staff have done a phenomenal job with what they've been assigned to do this season, turning this team around. I think they're right on schedule despite a lot of adversity. And yet, despite all of that, I do think there are this coaching staff has maybe left a little bit to be desired as far as just, I don't know, offensive creativity. It really feels like they've kept things very vanilla, almost to an extent, very basic,
Absolutely.
in trying to figure things out. And a big part of it, there was this statistics page that was being run around by Todd Whitehead on Twitter, and it included every NBA team's most productive action. And he quantified this, you know, points per possession, whether it was, you know, with post-ups, isolations, whatever, trying to figure out what a team's best go-to action was. And for the Rockets, the Rockets one was not great, unfortunately, because it was tied for dead last with the Washington Wizards of all teams. And it is Fred VanVleet, Alperen Sengun pick and roll, which generates 1.04 points per possession. Not great. To be dead last in offensive efficiency, tied with Tyus Jones and Daniel Gafford pick and roll. Like that's what you're tied with. That's how ugly the Rockets offense has been. Even though that's been their main go-to action, they were able to win games early on by spamming Fred and Alp pick and roll because they relied so heavily on their defense, and it didn't matter that was their best offensive action, even though it wasn't super efficient. It worked because they were limiting teams defensively, and they were the number one defense in the NBA for a little while early on. Now, that being said, I would like to see the Rockets make a shift here in this final stretch of the season and just try some new things offensively. Like what I don't want to see is it going back to a lot of the same old that we've seen for the majority this season, right? I think one thing that we've seen is Jalen has found kind of his little niche where he hasn't been shooting the ball well from outside, but where he has been shooting well from is, you know, in the mid range. He's been getting to his dribble pull-ups, kind of snaking through pick and rolls and getting, you know, when a defensive big drops.
He's learning that change of pace.
Yeah.
He's learning that change of pace.
Yeah. So I think capitalizing on that a little bit further, and in a way, you know, running some, you know, empty corner action with Sengun and Jalen, but I think you could even do it, you know, similar to how the Sacramento Kings run things with some of their pistol actions that they do, and just move Sengun in a little bit from the perimeter, right? Like, don't have Sengun and Jalen, you know, doing DHOs at the 3-point line. Have them come in, do them at, you know, the elbow or kind of free throw line extended area, and have Jalen play off of Alp, where Alp can be a screener. You know, he can screen and then quickly rescreen, and Jalen is so quick. You know, when he's moving without the basketball, again, he can go kind of one speed when he's moving without the ball. He beats his defender and then gets the handoff from Alp, and he's able to, if it's the first handoff, great. He's able to attack, get downhill into the paint, and we've seen him use his kind of change of pace in and around the rim as of late, which has been a nice, pleasant surprise. So he has that in his bag if he does that, or he can just immediately pull up, right? If the defender goes under the screen or under the handoff, then cool. You pull up, hit that mid-range that has been kind of a little bit of your bread and butter shot, kind of a rhythm shot for him, a comfort shot, if you will. And I think that also opens things up for Alperen and Sengun, because the defense is going to be trying to figure out, okay, how do we stop Jalen coming out of this DHO? And we can see Alp do some of the things that like Domantas Sabonis does in those moments where he just turns and barrels towards the rim, gets a full head of steam and goes downhill, or turns, if there's a switch for whatever reason, then cool, you can post up a smaller defender. You can turn and face up if there's nothing there, and maybe Jalen gets open on a back cut while the defender's occupied with whatever you're doing. I think there's a lot of little wrinkles out of that action that they can do and to get creative with. And I just would love to see a little bit more creativity offensively over this final stretch of the season.
Yeah, and I think the whole point about the whole vanilla thing, I think that also lends itself to the fact that the Rockets are still trying to figure out what are the skills of their young players, right? Is Jalen going to be somebody who's able to navigate a pick and roll effectively and generate space or generate a good change of pace and keep the defense from not just focusing on his drives, right? I think a lot of those different things are involved here. One play I'd like to see more, the Rockets have run it once or twice based off my memory, but I'd like to see it more, is you have Jalen at one of the free throw line extended elbow areas. You have Alp at the other. They're running horns, but with Jalen and Alp. Fred gives the ball to Alp, then runs a kind of little like elbow pick and roll dribble handoff with Jalen. What that does is that does a few things. One, Alp's still in the paint, right? He's so effective in the paint when he touches it. Jalen is close to the rim. He wants to drive. But that also makes it easier in terms of the types of reads and the types of passes Jalen is effective at making. So those quick dump-off passes or a quick side pass to the three-point line, those are things Jalen excels at right now. He's comfortable with. Do those things. I think your point about moving them closer away from the perimeter is a great point, and I wonder if Ime does implement that going into the second half of the season.
One more play type on my wish list is I would like to see some more big action between Sengun and Jabari. With those two guys have,
I'm all for it, man.
We saw earlier in the season, right? Ime was using Jabari as a post entry passer for a lot of the season. His height, his length allows him to get the ball in there, and then he can cut through and clear. And Alp's delivered him the ball on some of those clear throughs, right? Where he cuts. You
heard that on Locked On Rockets season preview. You and I talked about the big to big passing.
Yes, we did. So, and we've seen some chemistry between those guys. We've seen some interesting moments between them. So even, again, I do think for a team that struggles to shoot from outside and from the perimeter as badly as this Rockets team does, they need to get a little bit more creative with how they open things up inside the three-point line. Because they've already shown an ability to win games despite not being able to shoot a lick from three. And so if you can just get a little bit more creative about harnessing some of the mid-range capabilities of guys like Jalen, like Jabari, getting Alp some more effective paint touches, having proper spacing around him so that he can go to work when he does, get the ball. Need certain guys to, pick up the slack a little bit, like Fred and Jalen still have to shoot the ball a little bit better and be more consistent. But the ingredients are there, and you can have, I think, a slightly more effective offense than what we've seen from the Rockets. It's just going to take a couple little tweaks here and there, and hopefully that's something that Ime Udoka was able to spend a good portion of his All-Star break going over and figuring out before the Rockets go on their last little run here to close out this season. But we want to know from you guys. We want your thoughts on our discussion today. How do you feel about the no changes to the starting lineup? Let us know in the YouTube comments if you're listening, whether you're listening on your way to work, if you're watching on YouTube right now. Let us know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Give us your concerns about the Rockets offense. What would you like to see more of from the Houston Rockets offense? But Alykhan, you know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at.
Yeah, please talk in the comments. I love to read all the comments. It helps to me keep in mind kind of what you guys are thinking as well. So please comment or tweet at us on Twitter, whatever it is. But you can follow me at Rockets_Insider. Thanks again, Jackson.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.